Hey there, curious minds. So you've traveled a bit, seen some cool spots, maybe even bragged about that trip to Bali on Instagram. Cute. But here's the thing. Our planet has places that don't care about your passport, your money, or your adventure spirit. Places where governments say absolutely not. Where nature itself built the no-entry sign, and where locals won't even look in that direction after sunset. We're talking underground cities that officially don't exist, castles built specifically to seal something in, and ocean zones where ships vanish like your motivation on Monday morning. Today we're exploring 15 locations that are completely off-limits, some guarded by armed soldiers, others by 3 kilometers of solid ice, and a few by forces that science is still scratching its head over. These aren't your typical hidden gems travel influencers forgot to mention. These are the spots the world actively doesn't want you to see. So before we unlock these forbidden doors together, smash that like button if you're into mysteries that keep you up at night, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? I want to know which corner of the world is tuning in for this journey into the unknown. All right, let's go. Let's kick things off with a location that breaks every rule of medieval architecture and common sense. Picture this. Somewhere around the mid-1200s, workers in a remote forest about 50 kilometers north of Prague started building a castle. Nothing unusual there, right? Except this castle had no kitchen, no water source, no strategic value whatsoever. It wasn't protecting a border, guarding a trade route, or serving as anyone's home. Its windows were fake, literally glass panes covering solid stone walls, like medieval Photoshop. And here's the kicker. Its defensive walls faced inward, as if the builders weren't worried about keeping enemies out, but rather keeping something in. Welcome to Huska Castle, quite possibly the most architecturally nonsensical fortress ever constructed, unless, of course, its sole purpose was to seal a bottomless pit that locals had been calling the gateway to hell. The legends surrounding this site are older than the castle itself. Archaeological evidence shows that Celtic tribes inhabited this limestone cliff long before anyone thought to build anything on it, and Slavic peoples migrated to the region as early as the 6th century. According to Bohemian chronicler Václav Hayek, who documented the story in his Czech Chronicle, published in 1541, there was already a small wooden fort here by the 9th century. But the real star of the show was something far more unsettling. A crack in the limestone cliff that seemed to go down forever. Nobody knew how deep this hole went. Villagers threw rocks into it and never heard them hit bottom. They lit torches and watched the flames disappear into absolute blackness. And then, allegedly, things started crawling out of it. Local residents began calling it the hole to hell, and they avoided the area like it owed them money. Stories spread of winged creatures emerging from the darkness after sunset, of half-human, half-animal beings that wandered the forests at night, killing livestock and dragging unfortunate souls back into the pit. The smell of sulfur supposedly hung in the air for miles. Now you might be thinking, okay, medieval peasants, bit dramatic, aren't we? And sure, people in the 1200s blamed demons for everything from bad harvests to stubbed toes. But here's where it gets interesting. The local nobility took these reports seriously enough to do something about it. The villagers first tried the obvious solution: fill the pit with rocks. Just dump enough stones in there and call it a day. Small problem. The pit ate everything they threw at it. Cartloads of rock disappeared into the void without making a dent. The hole refused to be sealed. So the regional authorities, presumably running out of both patience and boulders, decided on a different approach. They would build over it. But first, someone needed to find out what was actually down there. This is where the story takes a turn that sounds like it belongs in a horror movie script, rather than a historical record. The local duke, determined to get answers, offered a deal to prisoners condemned to death. Anyone willing to be lowered into the pit on a rope and report back what they saw would receive a full pardon. Freedom in exchange for a quick trip to the bottom of an allegedly endless abyss inhabited by demons. Great deal, right? Unsurprisingly, volunteers were scarce. But eventually, a young man agreed. The rope was tied, he was lowered into the darkness, and for a while, everything was quiet. Then came the screaming. According to the legend, the young man's shrieks echoed from the pit with such intensity that the workers hauled him up immediately. When he reached the surface, the man who had been young moments ago now appeared decades older. His hair had turned white. His face was lined with wrinkles. He was, by all accounts, completely out of his mind. Unable to form coherent sentences, barely able to recognize his own surroundings. Some versions of the story say he died within days. Others claim he spent the rest of his shortened life in an asylum, unable to speak of what he witnessed. Naturally, other prisoners suddenly found the death penalty quite acceptable compared to the alternative. The Duke had seen enough. Construction began immediately on what would become Huska Castle, completed around 1278 during the reign of Ottokar II of Bohemia. The Gothic fortress was built with one primary objective: to seal the pit permanently. A chapel was constructed directly over the hole, dedicated to the Archangel Michael, the angel who, according to Christian scripture, led God's army against Lucifer during the war in heaven. If anyone was qualified to guard a door to hell, it was him. The thick stone floor of the chapel was meant to serve as an eternal barrier between our world and whatever lurked below. But the builders didn't stop there. The castle's defensive architecture was completely reversed from the standard medieval design. Instead of walls and fortifications meant to repel invaders, Huska's defenses faced inward toward the courtyard and toward the chapel. Arrow slits pointed into the castle rather than out. The message was clear. If anything managed to escape from beneath that floor, there would be soldiers ready to shoot it before it got far. The entire structure was essentially a prison for the supernatural. Now, you'd expect a chapel meant to contain demonic forces to be decorated with the usual religious imagery: saints, biblical scenes, angels triumphant over evil. Huska's chapel has some of that. There are frescoes showing the Archangel Michael battling a dragon and weighing souls at the Last Judgment. Pretty standard stuff. But there are also images that have baffled historians and art experts for centuries. One painting depicts a creature with the upper body of a human woman and the lower body of a horse. A centaur, which is a figure from pagan mythology that has absolutely no business being on the walls of a Christian church. Even more unsettling, this centaur is shown as a left-handed archer. In medieval Europe, left-handedness was associated with Satan himself. The Latin word for left, sinister, literally became synonymous with evil. A left-handed pagan creature painted in a chapel built to contain demons? That's not accidental. Many researchers believe this fresco was a deliberate acknowledgement of what the builders thought they were dealing with. Other paintings show dragons, demonic figures, and imagery that researchers have described as more pagan than Christian. It's as if the artists were documenting the very creatures that supposedly crawled from the pit, a visual warning to anyone who might forget why this place was built. The walls of the chapel have historically remained damp even during the most severe droughts, as if moisture seeps up from somewhere below. Visitors to this day report hearing scratching sounds from beneath the floor, along with what some describe as distant screams or the howling of animals. After its construction, Huska Castle largely sat empty for centuries. No noble family wanted to live there permanently. The place changed hands frequently, passed between various aristocratic owners who seemed more interested in possessing it on paper than actually residing within its walls. Then, in the early 1600s, during the chaos of the 30 Years' War, someone finally moved in and managed to make the castle's reputation even worse. His name was Oronto, a Swedish mercenary commander who led a band of brigands and rogue soldiers across the Bohemian countryside. But Oronto wasn't just a military man. He was also, allegedly, a practicing alchemist and dabbler in the dark arts. He chose Huska Castle as his headquarters specifically because of its reputation, believing that the forces beneath the chapel might help him achieve his ultimate goal, the elixir of eternal life. Imagine working with the literal pit of hell as your lab assistant. Oronto's experiments reportedly terrified the local villagers even more than his soldiers' raids. Strange lights were seen glowing from the castle windows at night. Unusual sounds echoed through the forest. Livestock disappeared. People whispered that the Swedish commander had struck some kind of deal with whatever lived beneath the stone floor. The locals eventually had enough. One night, 2 hunters crept up to the castle and shot Oronto through a window while he was working in his laboratory. The mercenary leader died immediately, ending his experiments but, according to legend, not his presence at Huska. His ghost is said to still wander the halls, dressed in a blood-stained military tunic, perhaps still searching for the immortality that eluded him in life. After Oronto's death, the castle fell into disrepair again, abandoned for over a century until restoration began in 1823. But the strangest chapter in Huska's history was yet to come. During World War II, after the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, the German SS took control of the castle. This in itself is deeply puzzling. Hoska had zero military significance. It wasn't near any important positions, couldn't house significant troops, and offered no strategic advantage whatsoever. The Wehrmacht had no rational reason to occupy this remote medieval fortress in the middle of nowhere. Unless, of course, the SS wasn't interested in military strategy at all. What we know about the Nazi occupation of Huska is limited because the SS, true to form, destroyed almost all records of their activities when they retreated in 1945. But local residents reported strange occurrences throughout the war years. Unusual lights emanated from the castle at night. Trucks arrived carrying unknown cargo and departed empty. Soldiers who ventured into the surrounding villages seemed disturbed, unwilling to discuss what was happening inside. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, was notoriously obsessed with the occult. He believed that supernatural forces could be harnessed to help the Nazis win the war, and he poured substantial resources into researching mystical artifacts and phenomena. Some historians speculate that Himmler's men occupied Hoska specifically to investigate whether the gateway to hell was real and whether it could be weaponized. Other theories suggest the castle served as a storage depot for Himmler's personal collection of over 13,000 manuscripts on the occult, spiritism, and dark magic. A library he allegedly feared would be destroyed in the bombing raids that devastated German cities. Either way, when Allied forces finally liberated the area, they reportedly found skeletal remains of German soldiers in the castle's courtyard and its well. No combat had occurred at Huska. No battles were fought anywhere near the site. Yet bodies in military uniforms were discovered. Some accounts say in positions suggesting they had been trying to escape from something, or perhaps were executed for failing at whatever task they'd been assigned. The truth died with them. After the war, the castle was returned to the Simonek family, descendants of Joseph Simonek, who had been the president of Skoda Automotive Company and purchased the property in 1924. They continue to own Hoska today, and the castle has been open to the public since 1999. But the current owners have refused to allow any extensive archaeological investigation of the site, particularly the areas beneath the chapel where the pit is believed to be located. Why? Nobody outside the family knows for certain. The refusal has only fueled speculation that something genuinely disturbing might be found if researchers ever got permission to dig. Modern visitors to Huska report experiences that range from mildly unsettling to outright terrifying. Electronic devices malfunction without explanation. Cameras refuse to work. Car engines won't start in the parking lot. People photograph the castle and later discover their images corrupted or mysteriously deleted. Some visitors claim to hear a chorus of screams coming from beneath the chapel floor. Others speak of an oppressive heaviness in certain rooms, a feeling of being watched, an overwhelming urge to leave. Ghost hunters and paranormal investigators have made Huska a regular destination, and the castle has been featured on numerous television programs dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The reports keep coming, and the legend refuses to die. So what do we actually make of all this? Was Huska Castle really built to seal a dimensional doorway to the underworld? Skeptics point out that the pit could simply be a natural geological formation, a sinkhole or limestone cave that villagers, lacking any understanding of geology, interpreted as something supernatural. The stories of demons and half-human creatures might have been nothing more than exaggerated sightings of diseased animals or strangers passing through the forest at night. The castle's unusual architecture could have practical explanations we've lost to history. Maybe it was built as a symbolic statement of royal authority, or perhaps the original plans were modified during construction for reasons that seemed perfectly logical at the time. But none of those explanations quite account for everything. The fake windows, the inward-facing defenses, the complete absence of basic amenities, the chapel frescoes that look more like a bestiary of nightmares than a place of worship, the centuries of consistent reports from people who had nothing to gain from fabricating stories, the Nazi obsession with a strategically worthless medieval ruin, the current owner's refusal to investigate what lies beneath. Today, Huska Castle stands about 50 kilometers north of Prague, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by car. Public transportation doesn't run frequently enough to make the trip practical. It's a challenging place to reach, which somehow feels appropriate. You can tour the castle, walk through the chapel, see the fading frescoes of demons and centaurs, and stand on the floor that supposedly seals the entrance to somewhere very, very bad. Whether you believe the legends or not, there's something undeniably eerie about the place. The air feels different. The silence seems heavier. And if you listen carefully in that medieval chapel, you might hear something beneath the ancient stone. A scratch, a whisper, a distant howl. Or maybe that's just your imagination, working overtime in a castle that has spent 8 centuries inspiring exactly that kind of fear. Either way, the gateway to hell remains sealed. For now. From a medieval castle sealing a pit to hell, we now travel to the opposite end of the spectrum, a place that doesn't need demons or supernatural legends to keep people away. Nature itself has built the most effective "Do Not Enter" sign imaginable. Welcome to Antarctica, the only continent on Earth with no permanent population, no native human inhabitants, and vast regions where no person has ever set foot. Not because they couldn't get a visa, there's no government to issue one anyway, but because getting there is essentially a death sentence unless you arrive with industrial-grade equipment, military-level logistics, and the kind of stubbornness that makes explorers famous or dead. Sometimes both. Antarctica is not just cold. Saying Antarctica is cold is like saying the sun is warm or taxes are slightly inconvenient. This is a place where the thermometer once dropped to minus 89.2 degrees Celsius at the Russian Vostok station on July 21, 1983, the lowest temperature ever directly recorded on Earth. To put that in perspective, at those temperatures, steel becomes brittle, fuel turns into gel, and exposed human skin freezes solid in under 30 seconds. Your breath doesn't just produce visible vapor, it crackles as the moisture instantly crystallizes in the air. And that record might not even be the true floor. NASA satellite data from 2010 detected surface temperatures dropping below minus 93 degrees Celsius on the East Antarctic Plateau between Dome Argus and Dome Fuji. Some researchers estimate that certain pockets of the interior might routinely plunge below minus 98 degrees during the polar winter. At that point, we're no longer talking about weather conditions. We're talking about a planetary surface that rivals the moons of Jupiter. But temperature is only part of the equation. Antarctica also holds the title for the windiest continent on Earth, thanks to a phenomenon called katabatic winds. Here's how it works. The interior of Antarctica is a massive elevated plateau, covered in ice several kilometers thick. This ice sheet constantly radiates heat into space, cooling the air directly above it until it becomes incredibly dense. Dense air is heavy air, and heavy air doesn't like sitting on top of a slope, so it flows downhill. Gravity pulls this frigid mass toward the coast, and as it descends, it accelerates. The landscape funnels this airflow through valleys and gaps in the ice, compressing it further, until what started as a gentle breeze transforms into a shrieking horizontal avalanche of frozen air. Wind speeds regularly exceed 100 miles per hour in coastal areas. Cape Denison, along Commonwealth Bay, holds the record for the highest average annual wind speed anywhere on the planet at 44 miles per hour, not as a gust, as an average. The strongest wind ever measured in Antarctica hit 199 miles per hour at Dumont d'Urville Station in 1972. At those velocities, you don't walk outside, you don't even crawl. You anchor yourself to something solid and hope the storm decides to take a break before the building does. And if the cold and the wind don't stop you, the dryness might. Antarctica is technically a desert, not the sandy, cactus-filled kind, but a polar desert receiving less than 166 millimeters of precipitation annually on average. The interior plateau gets less than 50 millimeters per year, which is drier than the Sahara. The snow you see blanketing the continent isn't fresh snowfall. It's the accumulated compression of millions of years of minimal precipitation, slowly transformed into glacial ice. This is an environment so hostile that bacteria struggle to survive. Good luck ordering an Uber or finding a Starbucks on every corner here. Now, considering all of this, you might assume that Antarctica is simply too harsh for anything interesting to exist beneath its surface. You would be spectacularly wrong. Under that 3-kilometer thick blanket of ice lies an entire hidden world that scientists are only beginning to understand. Mountain ranges, valleys, river systems, and hundreds of lakes that have been sealed away from sunlight for millions of years. Let that sink in for a moment. There are lakes under Antarctica that haven't seen the sun since before our earliest human ancestors were even a biological possibility. The most famous of these subglacial bodies is Lake Vostok, located directly beneath Russia's Vostok station in East Antarctica. This lake is approximately 250 kilometers long and 50 kilometers wide, roughly the size of Lake Ontario, but it sits beneath nearly 4 kilometers of solid ice. Scientists estimate that Lake Vostok has been completely isolated from the outside world for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years. The water inside exists in perpetual darkness at temperatures below freezing, kept liquid only by the immense pressure of the ice above and geothermal heat rising from the Earth's crust below. No sunlight, no atmospheric exchange, no contact with the ecosystems we know. Whatever is down there has been evolving independently for an almost incomprehensible span of time. Russian scientists finally breached the ice covering Lake Vostok in February 2012 after decades of drilling. When the drill broke through, water under tremendous pressure shot up the borehole and froze, creating a plug of lake ice that researchers could later retrieve for analysis. The controversy surrounding this achievement was immediate and intense. Critics pointed out that the drilling process used kerosene-based lubricants, potentially contaminating one of the most pristine environments on the planet. The international scientific community was not exactly thrilled. Some called it a breakthrough, others called it reckless. Either way, initial analysis of the accretion ice, frozen lake water stuck to the bottom of the glacier, revealed DNA fragments from over 3,500 different organisms, including bacteria, fungi, and sequences matching crustaceans, mollusks, and even fish. Whether these represent living organisms still inhabiting the lake or genetic remnants from a time when Antarctica was connected to the ocean remains an open question. Lake Vostok isn't alone. As of recent surveys, scientists have cataloged over 400 subglacial lakes beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, and many believe these water bodies are interconnected through subglacial rivers and channels. The implications are staggering. Beneath that frozen surface exists an entire hydrological network that has been hidden from human knowledge until the past few decades. Some of these lakes are being studied as analogs for extraterrestrial environments, specifically the ice-covered oceans believed to exist on Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus. If life can survive in the extreme conditions of Lake Vostok, the thinking goes, similar life might exist beneath the ice shells of other worlds. But subglacial lakes are only part of Antarctica's hidden geology. Buried beneath the highest regions of the East Antarctic ice sheet lies the Gamburtsev mountain range, a chain of peaks comparable in size and shape to the European Alps, yet completely invisible to the naked eye because it sits under more than 3 kilometers of ice. Soviet scientists first detected this range in 1958 using seismic equipment, and for decades, its very existence puzzled geologists. Mountain ranges typically form where tectonic plates collide, yet East Antarctica has been tectonically stable for hundreds of millions of years. How could such massive peaks survive erosion for so long? Recent research has finally provided answers. The Gamburtsev Mountains formed over 500 million years ago during the collision of ancient continents that created the supercontinent Gondwana. Normally, mountains that old would have eroded down to gentle hills long ago. But the East Antarctic ice sheet, which has covered the region for approximately 34 million years, essentially put the mountains in a deep freeze, protecting them from the erosive forces of wind, water, and ice movement. The peaks remain sharp and jagged, preserved like fossils in an icy museum. Scientists have described discovering these mountains as equivalent to opening an Egyptian pyramid and finding an astronaut inside. It simply shouldn't be possible, according to conventional understanding. What makes this even more remarkable is that we still don't have any physical rock samples from the Gamburtsev Mountains. Everything we know comes from airborne radar surveys, satellite data, and seismic readings. As one geologist put it, we have samples of the moon, but none from the Gamburtsevs. The region is simply too remote, too cold, and too deeply buried for direct access with current technology. Future expeditions may attempt to drill through the ice and retrieve actual rock specimens, but that would require the kind of logistical commitment that makes Antarctic operations look like casual weekend camping trips by comparison. Given all these hidden wonders, you might expect Antarctica to be crawling with researchers eager to unlock its secrets. In reality, access to much of the continent is restricted not by armed guards or barbed wire, but by a combination of international treaties, environmental protections, and the simple physical impossibility of reaching certain areas. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 and currently joined by over 50 nations, declares the entire continent a demilitarized zone, dedicated exclusively to peaceful scientific research. Military activities, weapons testing, and nuclear explosions are all prohibited. This is the only continent on Earth with such comprehensive international protection. A remarkable achievement considering it happened during the Cold War, when the United States and Soviet Union were pointing enough nuclear weapons at each other to end civilization several times over. Within this treaty framework exists a system of Antarctic specially protected areas, numbering over 70 sites across the continent. Entry to these zones requires permits issued by national authorities, and activities within them must conform to detailed management plans designed to minimize human impact. Some areas protect unique ecosystems, rare patches of vegetation, penguin colonies, seal breeding grounds. Others preserve sites of exceptional scientific value where contamination from human visitors could compromise decades of research. Still others are simply too dangerous for casual access, located in regions where the risk of crevasses, extreme weather, or logistical failures makes any visit potentially fatal. But beyond the officially protected zones lies something even more inaccessible: the vast interior of East Antarctica, where regions the size of European countries remain completely unexplored. The southern pole of inaccessibility, the point on the continent furthest from any ocean, is harder to reach than the South Pole itself. Satellites can image these areas from orbit, revealing the contours of ice sheets and the outlines of buried landscapes. But no human has ever walked across much of this terrain. The logistical challenges are simply too extreme. Aircraft can only operate in specific temperature windows. Below certain thresholds, hydraulic systems fail and fuel gels in the tanks. Ground vehicles face similar constraints. And foot travel is obviously out of the question across distances measured in hundreds of kilometers with no shelter, no supply points, and conditions that can shift from manageable to lethal within hours. This inaccessibility has, predictably, spawned countless conspiracy theories. Some claim that governments are hiding evidence of ancient civilizations beneath the ice, pointing to the Piri-Reis map, an Ottoman chart from 1513 that appears to show Antarctica's coastline before it was covered by ice. Others suggest that Nazi expeditions in the 1930s established secret bases on the continent, and that these facilities were later taken over by various world powers for experiments too sensitive to conduct elsewhere. Still others propose that Antarctica isn't actually a continent at all, but rather an ice wall surrounding a flat Earth, with the entire treaty system designed to prevent ordinary people from discovering the truth. Naturally, none of these theories hold up to scrutiny, but they persist because Antarctica is genuinely mysterious, genuinely inaccessible, and genuinely unlike anywhere else on the planet. The scientific reality is strange enough without inventing conspiracies. Consider this. Beneath the Antarctic ice sheet lies an estimated 70% of Earth's fresh water, locked up in glaciers that have been accumulating for tens of millions of years. If this ice were to melt completely, which current climate models suggest would take centuries even under worst-case warming scenarios, global sea levels would rise by approximately 58 meters. Every coastal city on Earth would be underwater. The entire geography of human civilization would need to be redrawn. The resources potentially buried beneath that ice are equally staggering. Geological surveys have detected evidence of massive mineral deposits, including coal, iron, and possibly rare earth elements essential for modern electronics. The Ross Sea region alone may contain over 500 billion barrels of oil. The 1991 Madrid Protocol currently bans all mineral extraction in Antarctica until at least 2048, but multiple nations, China foremost among them, have been dramatically expanding their research presence on the continent, building new stations and deploying advanced icebreakers. Pure scientific interest, surely, nothing to do with positioning for future resource claims. Meanwhile, the existing research stations themselves are fascinating microcosms of human adaptation to extreme environments. McMurdo Station, operated by the United States, is the largest settlement in Antarctica, with a summer population exceeding 1,000 people. It has dormitories, a chapel, a fire station, and a greenhouse producing fresh vegetables. Russia's Vostok Station sits at an elevation of 3,488 meters on the coldest spot on Earth, where winter temperatures make outdoor work impossible for months at a time. The Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, rebuilt in the 2000s at a cost of over $150 million, features an elevated modular design that allows snow to blow underneath rather than accumulating against the walls. Even with these engineering marvels, life at Antarctic stations means months of isolation, perpetual darkness or perpetual daylight depending on the season, limited communication with the outside world, and the constant awareness that a single medical emergency or mechanical failure could be fatal when the nearest hospital is literally on another continent. Antarctica remains Earth's last great wilderness, a place so vast, so harsh, and so profoundly alien that we have explored more of the moon's surface than we have of this frozen landmass at the bottom of our own planet. Beneath its ice lie ancient mountains, prehistoric lakes, and secrets that have been sealed away from human knowledge for millions of years. Some of those secrets are slowly being uncovered. Others may remain hidden for generations to come. And in the meantime, Antarctica continues to guard its mysteries with the most effective security system imaginable. A frozen wasteland that simply refuses to let most visitors survive long enough to see what's underneath. No demon-guarded pits required, just physics, geography, and enough ice to bury entire civilizations without leaving a trace. From the frozen wilderness of Antarctica, we descend even further, not in latitude this time, but in depth. Because while nature guards some of the planet's most forbidden zones, human beings have been busy constructing their own. Beneath the rolling hills of West Virginia, under granite mountains in Colorado, and scattered across the American heartland, lie facilities that officially didn't exist for decades. Underground cities designed to survive the apocalypse, maintain government continuity, and house the entire legislative branch of the United States while nuclear fire consumed everything above ground. These are the bunkers that governments built when they genuinely believed the end of the world was a scheduling matter. Let's start with one of the most audacious construction projects in American history. A project so brazen that thousands of people walked through a secret nuclear bunker for 30 years without realizing they were standing inside one. Welcome to the Greenbrier Resort in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, where luxury vacationers sipped mint juleps and played golf while, beneath their feet, 1,100 bunk beds awaited the arrival of every single member of the United States Congress in the event of thermonuclear war. The story begins in the late 1950s, during the Eisenhower administration, when the Cold War paranoia reached its absolute zenith. Soviet bombers were capable of reaching American soil, and the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles meant that Washington, D.C. could theoretically be vaporized with less than 30 minutes warning. The question facing government planners was straightforward. If the Soviets launched a first strike, where would Congress go? Someone needed to pass laws authorizing retaliation, appropriate emergency funds, and generally maintain the fiction of democratic governance while the country burned. The solution was to build a secret relocation facility far enough from Washington to survive a direct hit on the capital, but close enough for rapid evacuation. The Greenbrier Resort fit the requirements perfectly. Located about 4 hours from Washington by car, nestled in the Allegheny Mountains, the resort had hosted American presidents and dignitaries since the 1770s. It had even served as an internment facility for Axis diplomats during World War II. More importantly, it was already undergoing expansion plans, providing perfect cover for the construction of a 112,000-square-foot underground bunker designated Project Greek Island, or, as insiders initially called it, Project Casper, because, apparently, even code names need to sound slightly ridiculous. Construction began in 1958 under the guise of adding a new conference wing to the hotel. Observant locals immediately noticed something strange. The hole being dug was enormous, far larger than any hotel addition would require. Trucks arrived carrying staggering quantities of concrete, along with peculiar items. 110 urinals, massive steel doors weighing up to 28 tons each, and enough bunk beds to house a small army. Guards were stationed around the construction site. Workers operated under strict security protocols. Yet, despite the obvious abnormalities, the community of White Sulphur Springs kept quiet. In what might be the most impressive display of small-town discretion in American history, virtually everyone who suspected something agreed to keep their suspicions private. As one local later recalled, the entire town simply decided to be in on the secret together. The bunker was completed in 1962, buried 720 feet underground beneath what the public saw as the hotel's West Virginia wing. Behind two 25-ton blast doors, one measuring over 12 feet wide and 15 feet tall, lay a facility designed to sustain all 535 members of Congress for an extended period following a nuclear attack. The complex included dormitories with over 1,000 bunk beds, a 400-seat cafeteria, separate auditoriums for the House and Senate to continue legislative sessions, a medical clinic, a decontamination area for radioactive arrivals, a power plant, massive water storage tanks, and a communications center equipped with 3 generations of telephone technology to maintain contact with whatever remained of the outside world. Perhaps most grimly, the facility included a trash incinerator specifically designed to double as a crematorium. Because even in the apocalypse, bodies still need disposal. Here's where the deception became truly elegant. The bunker wasn't hidden in some remote corner of the property. Its largest spaces, the congressional auditoriums, were incorporated directly into the hotel's public areas. For 30 years, business associations, car companies, and medical conventions held meetings in rooms that were actually designed to host emergency sessions of Congress. Guests walked across floors built to withstand nuclear blasts, admired the unusually thick concrete columns that provided structural reinforcement, and never suspected a thing. A 1960s hotel brochure actually advertised one of the spaces to potential guests, noting that its floor was designed to support unlimited weight. Technically accurate, but perhaps underselling the intended purpose by a considerable margin. Maintenance of the bunker fell to a group of workers operating under a dummy company called Forsyth Associates, supposedly an audiovisual repair service responsible for maintaining the hotel's 1,100 televisions. In reality, Forsyth employees were Pentagon-trained specialists who kept the facility in constant readiness for activation. They updated communications equipment, rotated food supplies, ensured that decontamination systems remained functional, and generally prepared for a day they hoped would never come. All phone calls from the bunker were routed through the hotel's switchboard, making them appear to originate from regular guest rooms. The cover was so complete that even the hotel's own historian, who arrived in 1978 and spent decades studying every aspect of the property, suspected something was off but couldn't quite put the pieces together. The secret finally collapsed in 1992 when Washington Post reporter Ted Gupp published an exposé revealing the facility's existence. The government immediately decommissioned the bunker, ending a 30-year arrangement with the resort. Today, the facility offers public tours to approximately 50,000 visitors annually, who can walk through the blast doors, see the dormitories lined with their original metal bunk beds, and contemplate the surreal contrast between the luxury resort above and the utilitarian survival facility below. The experience is, by all accounts, genuinely unsettling, a concrete reminder of just how close the world came to scenarios that would have required such preparations. But the Greenbrier was merely one node in a much larger network. While Congress had its designated shelter in West Virginia, the executive branch maintained its own parallel system of survival facilities. The most famous of these is the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, a military installation so iconic that it's been featured in countless movies, television shows, and video games, most notably War Games in 1983, where it served as the headquarters of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Cheyenne Mountain is not technically a bunker in the conventional sense. It's an underground city carved directly into a granite mountain approximately 10 miles from Colorado Springs. Construction began in 1961, with the Army Corps of Engineers supervising the excavation of 693,000 tons of solid granite from a mountain standing nearly 10,000 feet tall. The resulting facility spans over 5 acres inside the mountain and contains 15 separate buildings, not rooms, buildings, all constructed on massive shock-absorbing springs designed to cushion the impact of a nuclear blast. The engineering specifications are staggering. The complex was built to withstand a 30-megaton nuclear explosion from as close as a mile and a half away, roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 2 blast doors, each weighing 25 tons and measuring nearly 20 inches thick, guard the entrance tunnel. The facility has its own power plant with 6 diesel generators, underground fuel storage, and 4 water reservoirs holding a combined 5.67 million liters of water, fed by a natural spring beneath the complex. These reservoirs are large enough to be navigable, and U.S. Navy personnel stationed at the facility have actually held re-enlistment ceremonies on the water, presumably because performing naval traditions in an underground mountain reservoir thousands of feet from any ocean makes about as much sense as anything else about the Cold War. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex served as NORAD's primary combat operations center from 1966 until 2008, when it transitioned to an alternate command center role. In the event of a catastrophic attack on the United States, the facility would become the hub for coordinating military responses, tracking incoming missiles, and maintaining command and control of whatever forces survived. The complex is designed to resist not just nuclear blasts, but also chemical, biological, and radiological attacks, cyber terrorism, and electromagnetic pulses. In 2015, the Pentagon awarded a $700 million contract specifically to upgrade the facility's EMP hardening, suggesting that concerns about such attacks remain very much active. Less famous, but equally critical, is Mount Weather, officially known as the High Point Special Facility, located in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains about 48 miles from Washington, D.C. The facility began as a weather research station in the 1890s, using elaborate balloons and kites to study the atmosphere. By the 1950s, however, its isolated location and exceptionally hard rock made it an ideal site for a different kind of government installation. Construction of the underground bunker began in 1954, and the facility has served as the civilian government's primary emergency hideaway ever since. Mount Weather's existence remained classified until 1974, when TWA Flight 514 crashed nearby, killing all 92 people aboard. The subsequent investigation inadvertently revealed that the crash site was adjacent to a major government bunker, information that had apparently never been shared with aviation authorities managing flights in the area. The revelation sparked congressional inquiries, though much about the facility remains classified to this day. What we know includes an underground cafeteria with seating for 300, office spaces, dormitories, VIP sleeping quarters, and training facilities. The complex is currently managed by FEMA and serves as a relocation site for senior government officials during emergencies. Following the September 11, 2001 attacks, congressional leadership was reportedly evacuated to Mount Weather by helicopter, demonstrating that the facility remains very much operational. Then there are the missile silos, perhaps the most viscerally terrifying component of America's Cold War underground infrastructure. During the height of nuclear tensions, the United States deployed 54 Titan II intercontinental ballistic missiles across 3 states, Arizona, Arkansas, and Kansas. Each missile stood over 100 feet tall, carried a 9-megaton nuclear warhead, roughly 600 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, and was housed in a hardened underground silo designed to withstand a near-direct nuclear strike. These silos weren't just storage facilities. They were staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by missile combat crews who lived and worked underground in sealed bunkers, running constant drills and awaiting launch orders that thankfully never came. The silos themselves extended over 160 feet into the earth, built on shock absorbers to protect the delicate electronics from vibration, and connected to launch control centers through underground tunnels and cableways. If the order had come, a Titan II could be fueled and launched in under 60 seconds, reaching targets 6,000 miles away in approximately 30 minutes. By the 1980s, the Titan II program was deemed obsolete. Newer missiles like the Minuteman III were faster, more accurate, and less prone to accidents. Several Titan II incidents over the years had caused considerable concern about the safety of storing liquid-fueled nuclear missiles underground. The missiles were decommissioned between 1982 and 1987, with demolition crews imploding the silos and sealing access points with concrete. Of the 54 original Titan II sites, only one remains intact today, Site 571-7, near Tucson, Arizona, now operating as the Titan Missile Museum, where visitors can descend 55 stairs into an actual launch control center, stand beneath an actual intercontinental ballistic missile, and experience a simulated launch sequence. The closest most people will ever come to understanding what it felt like to hold the literal keys to nuclear Armageddon. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of America's underground infrastructure isn't what we know about. It's what we don't. The government has acknowledged the existence of numerous bunkers and survival facilities, but military planners are notoriously reluctant to reveal the full extent of their preparations. Some estimates suggest there may be as many as 96 classified bunkers in the Washington, D.C. area alone. The Pentagon's own backup facility, known as Raven Rock, or Site R, is located in Pennsylvania and is sometimes referred to as the Underground Pentagon, a massive complex reportedly capable of housing thousands of personnel for extended periods. Similar facilities are rumored to exist beneath various government installations across the country, their locations and capabilities closely guarded secrets. Then there's the matter of how these facilities are connected. Since the 1950s, the government has pursued various tunnel boring programs of varying ambition. The most fascinating of these was the nuclear subterrane program developed at Los Alamos National Laboratory during the 1970s. Unlike conventional tunnel boring machines that mechanically cut through rock, the subterrane used nuclear reactor heat to literally melt its way forward, liquefying stone at temperatures approaching 1,500 degrees Celsius and leaving behind smooth, glass-lined tunnels that required no additional reinforcement. Los Alamos scientists were awarded several patents for this technology, including U.S. Patent number 3,693,731 in 1972, which describes a nuclear-powered tunneling machine capable of boring through solid rock at significant speed, while disposing of excavated material by extruding it as a vitreous lining on the tunnel walls. A 1973 study funded by the National Science Foundation concluded that nuclear submarines would be highly cost-effective compared to conventional methods, particularly in difficult geological conditions. Small-scale electrically powered prototypes were actually built and tested. One was used by the National Park Service to drill drainage holes at an archaeological site near Los Alamos, where its lack of vibration was essential to preserving fragile artifacts. The full-scale nuclear submarine was never built, at least not according to official records. The program was terminated in 1976, ostensibly because conventional tunnel boring technology continued to improve faster than expected. But the patents remain in the public domain, the research papers are accessible through government archives, and the technology was demonstrated to work at smaller scales. Whether any government ever built a full-scale nuclear tunneling machine, and what they might have done with it, remains a matter of speculation. Some researchers believe that classified tunnel networks connect major government installations across the country, constructed using technologies that have never been publicly acknowledged. Others dismiss such theories as conspiracy thinking. The truth, as with so many aspects of Cold War infrastructure, lies buried somewhere beneath layers of classification and compartmentalization. What we can say with certainty is this: during the darkest years of the nuclear age, the United States government constructed an entire parallel civilization beneath the surface of the country. Bunkers to shelter Congress, facilities to maintain military command, silos to launch retaliation, and communications networks to coordinate whatever remained. These underground cities were staffed, supplied, and maintained at enormous expense, constantly ready for a day that mercifully never arrived. Some have been decommissioned and open to tourists. Others remain active, their purposes updated for modern threats. And some, almost certainly, remain completely unknown to the public, their locations classified, their capabilities secret, their very existence denied. The Cold War ended more than 3 decades ago, but the bunkers remain. Mount Weather is being upgraded. Cheyenne Mountain recently received $700 million in improvements. The infrastructure of nuclear survival persists because the threats have evolved rather than disappeared. Electromagnetic pulse attacks, cyber warfare, pandemics, and the always-present possibility of nuclear exchange continue to justify maintaining facilities that most citizens never think about and few will ever see. Somewhere beneath your feet, right now, there may be a tunnel, a bunker, or a control center that exists specifically to ensure that some version of government survives whatever catastrophe might arrive. Sleep well with that thought. The people who built these places certainly hoped you would. We've explored places you can't visit because governments say no, places where nature will kill you before you reach the entrance, and places buried under layers of official secrecy. But now we arrive at something different. A location you cannot visit for a reason that should disqualify it from any serious list of forbidden destinations. Nobody knows if it actually existed. Welcome to Atlantis, the most famous address in human history that may have never had a single resident. Here's the thing about Atlantis. Everything we know about it comes from exactly one source. Not from ancient ruins, not from recovered artifacts, not from geological surveys, but from the writings of a single Greek philosopher who lived roughly 2,400 years ago. The philosopher was Plato. The writings were 2 dialogues called Timaeus and Critias, composed around 360 BC, and the story he told has spawned more books, documentaries, expeditions, and wild theories than perhaps any other tale in human history, despite being, according to the vast majority of classical scholars, a fictional parable invented by Plato himself to make a philosophical point. Naturally, this minor detail hasn't stopped anyone from searching for it with submarines. According to Plato's account, the story of Atlantis wasn't even his own discovery. It allegedly came to Greece through the famous lawgiver Solon, who visited Egypt sometime between 590 and 580 BC and learned of the lost civilization from Egyptian priests. Solon supposedly planned to turn the story into an epic poem that would rival Homer and Hesiod, but never finished it. Instead, he passed the tale to his friend Dropides, who told his son, also named Critias, who told his grandson, yet another Critias, who finally shared it with Socrates and friends in the dialogue that bears his name. That's 4 generations of oral transmission over roughly 200 years before Plato wrote anything down, which, for those keeping score at home, is approximately the reliability level of "my friend's cousin's neighbor definitely saw a UFO." But what a story it was. According to Plato, Atlantis existed 9,000 years before Solon's time. meaning roughly 9,600 BC by our calendar, which puts it squarely at the end of the last ice age. The island was located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which most interpreters identify as the Strait of Gibraltar, making Atlantis an Atlantic Ocean civilization. And the island wasn't small. Plato claimed it was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, which, by ancient Greek geographical understanding, meant something roughly the size of a small continent. Not exactly a quaint fishing village with a mystery attached. The island was supposedly given to the sea god Poseidon when the Olympian gods divided up the world. Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito, whose parents had conveniently died and left her living alone on a hill in the middle of the island. Being a god with unlimited access to geological engineering, Poseidon reshaped the terrain around her dwelling into alternating rings of water and land. 2 rings of land and 3 of water, making the central hill inaccessible to any mortals who might have designs on his beloved. He also installed 2 springs beneath the hill, one hot and one cold, because even divine romance requires proper plumbing. Poseidon and Cleito produced 5 pairs of twin sons, the eldest of whom was named Atlas, from whom the island, the surrounding ocean, and eventually a whole set of mountains and a book of maps would take their names. Atlas became the first king of Atlantis, and his descendants ruled the island for many generations, creating a civilization of unprecedented power and sophistication. The Atlanteans divided the island into 10 kingdoms, built a massive capital city around the original hill, and accumulated wealth that made the Greeks look like they were running a lemonade stand. The description of the Atlantean capital is where Plato really shows off his urban planning imagination. The concentric rings of water were connected by tunnels large enough for ships to pass through, essentially creating a series of circular harbors around the central island. Bridges crossed from ring to ring, with towers and gates at every intersection. The Atlanteans covered the outer wall in brass, the middle wall in tin, and the innermost wall, the one surrounding the citadel, with a mysterious metal called orichalcum, which supposedly flashed with red light and was considered second only to gold in value. Orichalcum deserves a brief detour because it's one of the few elements of the Atlantis story that has any tangible archaeological parallel. The name comes from Greek words meaning mountain copper, and Plato describes it as a metal that was common in Atlantis during ancient times but known only by name in his era. For centuries, scholars debated what orichalcum actually was, or whether it was purely fictional. Then, in 2015, marine archaeologists discovered 39 metal ingots in a 2,600-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. Analysis revealed them to be a brass-like alloy, 75 to 80% copper, 15 to 20% zinc, with traces of nickel, lead, and iron. The discovery didn't prove Atlantis existed, but it did demonstrate that the ancient Mediterranean world produced a copper alloy matching the general description of Plato's legendary metal. Whether this was actually what Plato meant, or whether Plato simply borrowed the name of a known alloy for his fictional paradise, remains unclear. Archaeologists being archaeologists, they continue to argue about it. At the center of the Atlantean capital stood a temple to Poseidon, which Plato describes with the enthusiasm of a real estate agent trying to sell the most expensive property in the universe. The temple was a stadium in length and half a stadium wide, with a roof of ivory and walls covered in silver orichalcum-plated pinnacles, and an interior featuring a gold ceiling. Inside stood a massive golden statue of Poseidon driving a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, so tall that the god's head nearly touched the roof. Around him stood 100 nereids riding dolphins, because apparently subtlety wasn't an Atlantean virtue. The Atlanteans themselves were blessed with extraordinary resources. They had forests, elephants, hot and cold springs, abundant crops, and mineral wealth beyond counting. Their engineering skills allowed them to build harbors, docks, and a canal system connecting the capital to the sea. Their military consisted of a staggering force of 10,000 chariots, 1,200 ships, and enough soldiers to make Alexander the Great look like he was running a weekend militia. For generations, they lived in peace and prosperity, blessed by their divine heritage. Then, everything went wrong, in the classic Greek tragedy fashion of success breeding hubris, breeding catastrophe. As the divine blood grew diluted through successive generations, the Atlanteans became increasingly corrupt. They grew ambitious, expansionist, and morally degraded. Eventually, they launched a massive invasion of the Mediterranean world, conquering much of Europe and Africa. Only ancient Athens, which Plato portrays as a perfect society remarkably similar to the ideal state he described in the Republic, stood against them. After a desperate struggle, Athens defeated the Atlantean forces and liberated the conquered territories. Then came the finale. In a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves, taking its magnificent civilization and all its inhabitants into the depths. The sea in that region, Plato claimed, became impassable due to the shoals of mud left by the subsidence. And that was it. The greatest naval power in ancient history, erased from existence in roughly 24 hours. Here's where the story gets interesting from a modern perspective. Plato explicitly states that this catastrophe occurred 9,000 years before Solon's time, which works out to approximately 9,600 BC. That date isn't random. It coincides almost exactly with the end of the Younger Dryas period, a dramatic climate event that marked the final transition from the last ice age to our current warm period. Sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted, entire coastlines were submerged, and the world looked very different than it had a few centuries earlier. Some researchers have suggested that Plato, or the Egyptian priests if we're being generous about the story's origins, might have preserved a cultural memory of actual catastrophic flooding events from this era, even if the specific details about golden temples and elephant herds were obvious embellishments. This coincidence has fueled endless speculation about where Atlantis might have actually been located, assuming it was located anywhere at all. The suggestions range from plausible to creative to outright delusional. Let's tour the greatest hits. The most scientifically grounded theory connects Atlantis to the Minoan civilization, and specifically to the volcanic island of Thera, known today as Santorini. Around 1600 BC, Thera experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history, rated 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, meaning roughly 100 times more powerful than the eruption of Vesuvius that buried Pompeii. The explosion destroyed the island's center, created a massive caldera, and generated tsunamis that devastated the northern coast of Crete, where the sophisticated Minoan civilization was centered. The settlement of Akrotiri on Thera was buried under volcanic ash and preserved for 3,500 years until archaeologists rediscovered it in 1967. A Bronze Age Pompeii with multi-story buildings, indoor plumbing, and sophisticated art. Proponents of this theory argue that Plato might have inflated the dates by a factor of 10. 9,000 years became 900 years when Egyptian symbols were mistranslated, which would place Atlantis's destruction around 1600 BC. Roughly matching the Thera eruption. The circular caldera could be the inspiration for the concentric rings. The Minoans were indeed a naval power with advanced engineering. The problems with this theory include the minor detail that ancient Greeks were perfectly aware of volcanoes and probably would have mentioned one if that's what destroyed Atlantis, plus the fact that Crete and Thera are inside the Mediterranean, not beyond the Pillars of Heracles, as Plato specifically states. Moving further afield, numerous researchers have suggested locations in the Atlantic Ocean itself. After all, it's called the Atlantic Ocean partly because of the Atlantis legend. The Azores, the Canary Islands, and Madeira have all been proposed as remnants of a larger landmass. The problem here is plate tectonics. Continents don't sink. The mid-Atlantic ridge is a spreading zone where new oceanic crust is created, not a location where landmasses disappear. There's simply no geological evidence for a large island in the Atlantic that vanished within human memory. Spain and Morocco have attracted considerable attention. The Doñana National Park in southern Spain, near Cadiz, contains mudflats and marshlands that some researchers believe might conceal buried structures matching Atlantean descriptions. German researcher Rainer Kuhne identified what he believed were concentric rings visible in satellite imagery of the area. Morocco's Atlantic coast has also been proposed, with some researchers pointing to a circular geological formation called the Richat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, as a possible Atlantis location. The Richat structure is genuinely impressive. A 40-kilometer-wide dome of eroded rock with concentric ridges that look remarkably like Plato's description. The problems include the fact that it's 400 kilometers inland, though sea levels were lower during the Ice Age. There's no archaeological evidence of any ancient city there, and the structure is approximately 100 million years old, which somewhat predates human civilization. Antarctica, yes, Antarctica, has been proposed as Atlantis by several writers, most notably Graham Hancock in Fingerprints of the Gods. The theory relies on the idea that Earth's crust can shift rapidly, moving the continent from a temperate zone to its current polar position within a few thousand years. Charles Hapgood popularized this Earth crustal displacement theory in the 1950s, and it gained new life when proponents pointed to the Piri-Reis map of 1513, which supposedly shows Antarctica's coastline as it would appear ice-free. The problems with this theory are numerous. Continental drift doesn't work that way. The Piri-Reis map almost certainly doesn't show Antarctica, and excavating a frozen continent to look for golden temples seems logistically challenging at best. More exotic suggestions include Bolivia. The high-altitude Altiplano has concentric geological formations. Indonesia, the sunken landmass of Sundaland was above water during the Ice Age. The Caribbean, the Bimini Road underwater rock formation, sparked decades of speculation. And even Ireland and Britain. Each theory has its devoted advocates, its compelling coincidences, and its fundamental problems that believers tend to gloss over. The most honest assessment comes from classical scholars who study Plato professionally. The overwhelming academic consensus is that Atlantis was a literary invention, a fictional setting created by Plato to serve his philosophical purposes. The Timaeus and Critias dialogues were written to explore themes of hubris, divine punishment, and the superiority of Plato's ideal state over decadent naval empires. Atlantis represents everything Athens should not become: wealthy, militaristic, expansionist, and morally corrupt. Its destruction serves as a warning about the fate awaiting societies that abandon virtue for power. Consider the literary structure. Plato opens by having Socrates complain that his description of the ideal state, in the Republic, felt incomplete because he never showed it in action. Critias conveniently produces a story about an ancient, perfect Athens that embodied all of Socrates' principles and triumphed over a corrupt empire. The coincidence is too perfect to be anything but intentional. As the philosopher Julia Annis noted, Plato uses a standard device of fiction, stressing the historicity of an event as an indication that what follows is fiction. Even Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, apparently didn't believe the story. A later commentator, Strabo, quotes Aristotle as saying that Plato invented Atlantis and then destroyed it. The man who dreamed it up also made it disappear. Coming from someone who actually knew Plato, this assessment carries considerable weight. And yet, people keep searching. The appeal of Atlantis transcends its plausibility. The idea of a lost golden age, a civilization more advanced than our own that was wiped out by catastrophe, speaks to something deep in human psychology. Every culture has flood myths and stories of fallen paradises. Atlantis fits into this universal pattern while offering the tantalizing possibility that it might actually be found. That somewhere beneath the waves lies evidence of a forgotten chapter of human achievement, waiting for discovery. Modern technology has only intensified the search. Sonar mapping, satellite imagery, underwater drones, and advanced archaeology have revealed countless underwater sites that were above water during the Ice Age. There are genuinely ancient settlements submerged off coastlines around the world, not because continents sank, but because sea levels rose. These discoveries feed the hope that Atlantis might be among them, even as they consistently fail to produce anything matching Plato's description. Perhaps the real lesson of Atlantis is about humanity's relationship with mystery. We have mapped the ocean floors, explored the deepest trenches, and cataloged every island on Earth. Yet we continue to search for a place that a philosopher probably invented to make a point about politics. The search itself reveals something about us: our need for lost worlds, our hope that the past contains secrets we haven't yet uncovered, our willingness to believe in something extraordinary against all evidence. Atlantis remains, in the most literal sense, a place you cannot visit. Not because of guards or geography, not because of treaties or temperatures, but because it may never have existed outside the imagination of one of history's greatest minds. Whether that makes it less fascinating or more is entirely a matter of perspective. Some mysteries are more valuable unsolved, and some forbidden places are most powerful when they remain forever beyond our reach. Not in the depths of the ocean, but in the realm where history and legend blur into something larger than either. From legendary civilizations that may never have existed, we turn to something that definitely exists, that you can walk past on a pleasant afternoon in New Haven, Connecticut, and that you will absolutely never be allowed to enter unless you happen to be one of 15 carefully selected Yale seniors, tapped each year to join America's most notorious secret society. Welcome to the Skull and Bones and their windowless fortress known simply as the Tomb. A building that has been churning out presidents, CIA directors, media moguls, and conspiracy theories since 1832. The Tomb sits at 64 High Street, directly across from Yale's old campus where 1,400 freshmen live, sandwiched between the Yale University Art Gallery and a residential college. It's not hidden. It's not disguised. It's just standing there. A grim brownstone mausoleum with an Egypto-Doric facade, 0 windows on the street-facing walls, and absolutely no indication of what happens inside. Every day, hundreds of Yale students walk past this building, wondering what secrets lie behind those blank walls. Most of them will never find out. A select few will be tapped on the shoulder during their junior year and asked a simple question. Skull and bones, accept or reject? Those who accept enter a world that has shaped American power for nearly 2 centuries. Those who reject, well, Senator Joseph Lieberman rejected the tap and joined a different society instead. So apparently, you can survive the snub. The society was founded in December 1832 by William Huntington Russell and Alphonso Taft. Yes, that Taft family. After a dispute among Yale's existing debating societies over Phi Beta Kappa awards. Russell had recently returned from studying in Germany, where he'd apparently developed a taste for secret student organizations with elaborate rituals and impressive-sounding names. The original name was the Eulogian Club, supposedly dedicated to a fictional Greek goddess named Eulogia, whose mythological biography conveniently begins with the death of the orator Demosthenes in 322 BC. This explains the number 322 that appears beneath the skull and crossbones emblem, though whether it refers to the year of Demosthenes' death, the society being the second core of a German organization, or the English Freemasonic Lodge of Virtue. And silence, number 322, depends entirely on which conspiracy theory you prefer. The society's internal documents are reportedly dated Anno Demostheni, meaning they count years from 322 BC rather than using the conventional calendar. Because if you're going to be a secret society, you might as well go all in on the eccentricity. The tomb itself was constructed in 3 phases. The original wing went up in 1856, featuring that distinctive windowless brownstone exterior designed by either Alexander Jackson Davis or Henry Austin. Architectural historians have been arguing about this for over a century, which tells you something about how well the society keeps its secrets. A second wing doubled the building's size in 1903, and in 1912, neo-Gothic towers were added to the rear garden, creating an enclosed courtyard hidden from public view. The overall effect is precisely what you'd expect from a group calling itself the Brotherhood of Death. Fortress-like, deliberately intimidating, and architecturally committed to the aesthetic of, we have things to hide. What happens inside the tomb? This is where things get interesting, complicated, and impossible to verify with certainty. The society meets twice weekly, every Thursday and Sunday evening, for sessions that reportedly last around 6 hours. During these meetings, members engage in discussions, rituals, and the peculiar bonding exercises that have fueled speculation for generations. But the initiation is what captures the imagination. According to various accounts pieced together from leaked documents, brave break-ins by curious outsiders, a group calling itself the Order of File and Claw, managed to enter in 1877 and published a pamphlet about what they found, and testimonies from bonesmen who've broken their vows of silence. The initiation involves symbolic death and rebirth. New members, called neophytes, are reportedly placed in coffins, carried through the building, and chanted over until they are reborn into the society. They're given robes with symbols, assigned secret names that they'll carry for life, and a bone with their name inscribed is supposedly tossed into a communal bone heap at the start of every meeting. Some accounts mention a mud pile plunge. Others describe older members in skeleton costumes presiding over the ceremonies. The overall atmosphere appears to be something between a haunted house, a fraternity hazing ritual, and an unusually dramatic TED Talk about mortality. Then there's the confessional component. Each member is reportedly required to deliver an extensive oral autobiography during their senior year, revealing intimate details of their lives, including, allegedly, their complete sexual history. These confessions are supposedly recorded in what some call black books, creating a permanent record of each member's deepest secrets. Whether this serves as a bonding mechanism, a trust exercise, or a subtle form of insurance against future betrayals depends on your level of cynicism. The society's motto might as well be Memento Mori, remember that you will die. And the entire aesthetic reinforces this theme. Skeletons, skulls, both real and artificial, coffins, and other funereal decorations reportedly adorn the interior. The decor itself has become legendary. According to Alexandra Robbins, a Yale graduate who wrote the definitive book Secrets of the Tomb after convincing over 100 bonesmen to break their silence and receiving threatening phone calls for her trouble, the interior includes rooms draped in red and black velvet, German artifacts and inscriptions on the walls, a dining hall with large windows overlooking the hidden courtyard, and a space called the Inner Temple. The Inner Temple supposedly houses a skeleton nicknamed Madame Pompadour, because members believe it belonged to the influential 18th-century French noblewoman, Madame de Pompadour, and a grandfather clock in front of which every member's portrait is photographed. In the old days, each alumnus received an identical grandfather clock on his wedding day, though the tradition was discontinued when the alumni network grew too large to sustain the expense. Some Brotherhood rituals apparently have budget constraints, but the most notorious items allegedly inside the tomb are the stolen skulls. The society has a documented tradition of crooking, stealing keepsakes from other Yale societies, campus buildings, and occasionally from much further afield. Members reportedly compete to outdo each other's crooks. The most famous allegation involves the skull of Geronimo, the legendary Apache warrior who died in 1909. According to persistent rumors, Yale student Prescott Bush, father of George H.W. Bush and grandfather of George W. Bush, along with several fellow bonesmen, exhumed Geronimo's remains in 1918 during a military assignment near Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where Geronimo was buried. They allegedly brought the skull and several bones back to the tomb, where they've been displayed ever since. The Geronimo story became serious enough that in 2009, Geronimo's descendants filed a lawsuit to recover the remains. The case was eventually dismissed, though not before generating considerable media attention and forcing various bonesmen to issue denials. Other skulls allegedly in the tomb's collection include those of President Martin Van Buren and Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa. In 2010, Christie's auction house canceled a planned sale of a human skull with links to Skull and Bones, adding another layer of weirdness to an already strange saga. Whether any of these skulls are genuine, purchased reproductions, or elaborate society jokes remains unclear. The society's commitment to secrecy means we may never know for certain. What we do know, with complete certainty, is the membership roster, at least through 1982, when the society stopped publishing official lists. And that roster reads like a who's who of American power. 3 United States presidents have been bonesmen. William Howard Taft, initiated 1878, who was both president and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the only person to hold both positions. George H.W. Bush, initiated 1948, the 41st president and former director of the CIA, and George W. Bush, initiated 1968, the 43rd president. The Bush family's connection to Skull and Bones spans multiple generations. Prescott Bush, the alleged Geronimo grave robber, was initiated in 1917, and his brother-in-law George Herbert Walker Jr. joined in 1927. But presidents are just the beginning. Henry Stimson, Secretary of War under 2 presidents and one of the most influential figures in American foreign policy, was a bonesman. So was Henry Luce, founder of Time, Life, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated magazines, who was given the secret name Ball upon initiation. William F. Buckley, Jr., the intellectual architect of modern American conservatism and founder of National Review, was initiated in 1950, and later served briefly in the CIA, as did his fellow bonesman William Sloane Coffin, who became a prominent progressive activist and clergyman. Robert Lovett designed the blueprint for the CIA after World War II. F. Truby Davison served as Director of Personnel at the CIA. The connections between Skull and Bones and American intelligence services run so deep that conspiracy theorists have a field day with the overlaps. Then came the 2004 presidential election, when both major party nominees were bonesmen. John Kerry, the Democratic candidate, had been initiated in 1966. George W. Bush, the Republican incumbent, had joined 2 years later. When reporters asked both candidates about their Skull and Bones membership during the campaign, neither would say a word. Kerry replied, "Not much, because it's a secret." Bush wrote in his autobiography that Skull and Bones was so secret, I can't say anything more. Here were 2 men competing to lead the free world, both bound by oaths of secrecy to an undergraduate secret society. The election essentially guaranteed that America would be led by a bonesman regardless of who won. If you're looking for evidence of a shadow government, this is usually where conspiracy theorists start circling things in red marker. The society's influence extends beyond government. The membership roles include Supreme Court justices like Potter Stewart, media titans, investment bankers, foundation directors, university presidents, and captains of industry. The names Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Ford, Phelps, Pillsbury, Walker, and Whitney all appear. Walter Camp, known as the father of American football, was initiated in 1880. Lyman Spitzer, the theoretical physicist who first proposed a space-based observatory that eventually became the Hubble Space Telescope, joined in 1935. The society has produced an astonishing concentration of American elites across virtually every field of endeavor. How does a group of 15 undergraduates every year produce such outsized influence? The answer lies partly in selection and partly in networking. Skull and Bones historically tapped the most prominent members of each Yale class: the football captain, the editor of the Yale Daily News, fraternity presidents, star athletes, and campus leaders of every description. By selecting students who were already on track for success, the society ensured a membership of high achievers. But the real power comes from what happens after graduation. The Russell Trust Association, incorporated in 1856, manages the society's assets, currently valued at around $17 million, including the tomb and a 40-acre retreat called Deer Island on the St. Lawrence River. This private island serves as a summer gathering place where bonesmen of all generations can rekindle old friendships. The network extends throughout members' careers. Introductions are made, favors are exchanged, and doors are opened. As one bonesman reportedly explained to journalist Alexandra Robbins, the society isn't about ruling the world. It's about knowing the right people to call at 2 a.m. When your fellow alumni include presidents, CIA directors, and the heads of major corporations, that phone call can accomplish quite a lot. The society has evolved over time, though not always smoothly. Women were excluded until 1991, when the undergraduate members voted to admit female juniors. This decision provoked a crisis. A group of older alumni, led by William F. Buckley, Jr., actually changed the locks on the tomb and suspended operations for a year, arguing that admitting women required a formal change in bylaws. John Kerry spoke out in favor of inclusion. The dispute made the editorial pages of the New York Times. Eventually, a second alumni vote accepted women, and the lawsuit was dropped. The first female boneswomen entered in 1992, roughly 160 years after the society's founding. By 2020, Skull and Bones tapped its first entirely non-white class. And according to The Atlantic, the society has utterly transformed in recent years. The class of 2021 reportedly admitted no conservatives, a stunning shift for an organization once considered the epitome of the Eastern establishment. Yet the secrecy persists. The tomb still stands, windowless and imposing. The rituals presumably continue behind those sealed doors. And the tomb remains one of the most famous buildings in America that ordinary citizens will never enter. You can walk past it any day of the week, photograph its exterior, watch the somber figures in dark flannel filing in for their Thursday evening meetings. But unless you're one of approximately 800 living bonesmen or boneswomen, you'll never know what's actually inside. You'll never see the alleged skull of Geronimo, or sit in the room dedicated to William Howard Taft, or read the confessional black books, or understand what rituals play out in the inner temple. Is Skull and Bones a shadowy cabal plotting world domination? Probably not, though 3 presidents, numerous CIA officials, and enough media moguls to control the narrative suggest they've at least considered the option. Is it an elaborate fraternity with dorky rituals and pompous alumni who take themselves too seriously? Almost certainly. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in between. A genuine network of genuine elites who genuinely help each other, wrapped in enough secrecy and symbolism to make the whole enterprise irresistible to conspiracy theorists, and fascinating to everyone else. The tomb keeps its secrets. And in an age when privacy has become nearly impossible, when every organization's internal communications eventually leak, when whistleblowers and hackers expose what was meant to stay hidden, there's something almost admirable about an undergraduate club that has maintained its mysteries for nearly 2 centuries. Whatever happens inside that windowless building on High Street, it's one of the few things in American life that remains genuinely unknown. For 15 Yale seniors every year, the tap on the shoulder opens a door that closes behind them forever. For the rest of us, the tomb stands silent, its secrets intact, daring us to wonder what lies within. From secret societies operating in plain sight in New Haven, we travel to a place where secrecy was once enforced by barbed wire, watchtowers, and soldiers with orders to shoot on sight. Welcome to Šumava, the Bohemian Forest, a mountain range straddling the border between the Czech Republic and Germany that spent 4 decades behind the Iron Curtain and emerged with secrets that go far beyond Cold War espionage. Here, in the largest continuous forest in Central Europe, locals report encounters with unidentified objects in the sky, unexplained lights dancing between ancient trees, and the peculiar tendency for electronic devices to malfunction in ways that would make any IT support specialist weep. Some hunters claim their rifles fused from the inside after close encounters, while others report photographs vanishing from their phones as if deleted by invisible hands. Unsurprisingly, scientists have theories involving radon deposits and geological anomalies. The locals, meanwhile, prefer not to discuss what happens after dark. The Bohemian Forest, or Šumava in Czech, earned its name from a Proto-Slavic word meaning dense forest, though folk etymology connects it to šum, the Czech word for the humming sound wind makes through trees. Either way, the name captures something essential about this place. It is vast, ancient, and full of whispers. At over 680 square kilometers, Šumava National Park represents the largest national park in the Czech Republic, and together with the adjacent Bavarian Forest National Park in Germany, it forms the biggest forested area on the continent. The mountains themselves are geological ancients, over 300 million years old, predating both the Alps and the Himalayas. When these rounded peaks were young, dinosaurs were still 50 million years away from existing. The trees have seen civilizations rise and fall, borders shift and dissolve, and apparently, things in the sky that nobody can quite explain. The region's human history is relatively young by comparison, but no less dramatic. Celtic tribes arrived around 400 BC, giving the area its name Bohemia, after the Boii people. These early inhabitants left behind something that still puzzles archaeologists: a prehistoric hill fort called Obžírad, or Giant's Castle, perched at approximately 1,000 meters above sea level near the village of Popelna. This makes it the highest altitude archaeological monument in the entire Czech Republic, which immediately raises the question: why would anyone build a fortress at such an inconvenient elevation? The strategic value seems questionable at best. There were no major trade routes to protect, no rival settlements to monitor, and the location would have been brutally difficult to supply during winter months. The fortress walls show another peculiarity. The side-facing difficult mountainous terrain was heavily fortified, while the approach from easier ground was left relatively undefended. It is almost as if the builders were protecting themselves from something coming down from the peaks, rather than up from the valleys. Excavations at Giant's Castle have yielded remarkably few everyday objects. No pottery shards, no animal bones, no tools suggesting permanent habitation. What archaeologists did find was a stone block shaped like a stool, which most researchers interpret as a sacrificial altar. The evidence suggests this was not a settlement, but a ritual site, a place where Celtic priests gathered to perform ceremonies in the wilderness, far from prying eyes. Local legends, however, have their own interpretation. Stories passed down through generations speak of giants who once lived in these mountains, beings tall enough to use these structures as furniture. The name Giant's Castle did not come from archaeologists. It came from centuries of local folklore that predates scientific investigation. Whether the Celts were performing rituals to appease these legendary beings, or whether the legends grew from misremembered ceremonies, remains a matter of considerable debate, and absolutely zero definitive answers. The forest's mysterious reputation only intensified during the Cold War. After World War II, the region's German-speaking population was expelled, and Šumava became part of the Iron Curtain, the fortified border separating communist Czechoslovakia from the West. The consequences for the landscape were profound. Dozens of villages that had existed for centuries were razed to the ground, their inhabitants scattered, their names erased from maps. The border zone became a restricted military area, where ordinary citizens were forbidden to travel. Watchtowers rose among the ancient trees, their searchlights sweeping through the darkness. Soldiers patrolled with dogs and automatic weapons. The forest, which had been home to glassmakers, foresters, and farmers for generations, became a no-man's land where attempting to cross could get you killed. Over 1,000 people died trying to escape across the Czech borders between 1945 and 1989. Some were shot by guards, Others died in minefields, and still others perished in the harsh mountain conditions while trying to find a way through. The desperation required to attempt such crossings speaks volumes about life behind the Iron Curtain, and the forest absorbed these tragedies silently, as forests do. But the military presence also brought something else: surveillance technology, radar installations, and listening posts designed to monitor Western communications. The most famous of these was the Polednik Tower, a signals intelligence station perched on one of Shumava's peaks, dedicated to wiretapping radio communications from the West. The communist government was so secretive about this installation that they actually erased the mountain peak from official maps. Imagine explaining that to a cartographer. Yes, we need you to pretend this mountain doesn't exist. The tower is now open to tourists and offers spectacular views, though whether any of its original surveillance equipment picked up anything, genuinely unexplained, has never been officially disclosed. When the Iron Curtain fell in 1989, Shumava reopened to the public after 4 decades of isolation. What visitors found was a landscape transformed, not destroyed, but rewilded. The absence of human activity had allowed nature to reclaim the abandoned villages, the former border zone, the paths once walked by farmers and craftsmen. The forest had grown denser, wilder, more primeval than anywhere else in Central Europe. In 1991, the area was designated a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve and granted national park status, protecting its unique ecosystem for future generations. But along with the returning hikers, cyclists, and nature enthusiasts came reports of something else: strange phenomena that the communist authorities had apparently suppressed or ignored. The Czech Republic experiences approximately 150 reported UFO sightings per year, which is remarkably high for a country of its size. The Prague Observatory alone receives around 100 calls annually from citizens reporting unusual aerial phenomena. According to investigators from Project Zada, the GLOW project, roughly 40% of these sightings can be definitively explained: aircraft, satellites, meteorites, or the occasional over-enthusiastic disco light bouncing off clouds. Another 50% remain unresolved due to insufficient evidence. But somewhere between 2 and 10% of cases present a genuine puzzle. Witnesses provide detailed, credible accounts of phenomena that simply do not match any known category. The Czech attitude toward such reports tends toward skepticism. As one astronomer put it, Czechs are not easy to persuade and very much debunkers by nature. This cultural tendency makes the persistence of unexplained sightings all the more intriguing. If anyone was going to dismiss strange lights in the sky with a shrug and a sensible explanation, it would be the Czechs. The most famous Czech UFO incident occurred in 1987 at Vranov nad Dyí in South Moravia rather than Shumava, but it established a pattern that would repeat throughout the border regions. On July 12th, a military helicopter from the 51st Regiment was scrambled to intercept an unidentified object detected on radar. The crew initially assumed they were tracking a cloud formation that was somehow confusing the radar system. Then they saw it: a cigar-shaped object that maneuvered with impossible agility, always positioning itself toward the sun to avoid being targeted, always staying just out of weapons range. The encounter lasted approximately 2 minutes before the object vanished into cloud cover. What followed was even stranger. The object reappeared on radar heading directly toward the helicopter at high speed, causing the crew to take evasive action. The pilot's report, preserved in regimental histories, describes the encounter in dry military language that somehow makes the whole thing more unsettling. Whatever the object was, it displayed behavior suggesting either intelligence or programming far beyond anything the Czechoslovak military had encountered. In 1991, the small town of Milichin, south of Prague, experienced what some call the Czech Roswell. Residents reported a glowing sphere hovering silently in the night sky, moving fluidly in ways that conventional aircraft cannot replicate. Witnesses claimed the object seemed to follow people as they walked, maintaining its position relative to observers rather than pursuing a fixed trajectory. Some reported seeing humanoid figures inside the craft, though such accounts should be treated with appropriate skepticism. What cannot be disputed is that the sightings continued for years, becoming so embedded in local culture that the town website now officially acknowledges them, and small alien figures have been painted on public buildings throughout Milichin. The glowing sphere reportedly returned in 2015, suggesting either a remarkable commitment to consistency by whatever phenomenon is responsible, or an equally remarkable commitment to hoaxing by someone with a very long attention span. The Shimava region specifically has accumulated its own collection of strange accounts. Witnesses near Chertovo Lake, Devil's Lake because of course it is called Devil's Lake, have reported steel-gray oval objects that change speed erratically before tilting sideways and accelerating into the sky. Others describe sounds like fighter jets, but smaller, flying at treetop level rather than above them. Some theorists have proposed that the region's unique geology might explain the phenomena. Shimava sits atop significant deposits of gold, which has been mined from local streams since medieval times, and the broader Bohemian Massif contains substantial radon deposits. The town of Yakimov, in the nearby Ore Mountains, was once the world's primary source of radium. Marie Curie obtained the ore for her Nobel Prize-winning research from its mines. Whether radioactive minerals, gold deposits, or other geological factors could produce atmospheric phenomena visible to the naked eye remains scientifically undemonstrated. But the correlation between mineral-rich regions and anomalous reports is suggestive enough to keep researchers interested. Then there are the accounts that resist any rational explanation. Hunters in the Shimava forests have reported electronic equipment malfunctioning in specific locations, not the gradual battery drain you might expect from cold temperatures, but sudden, complete failures followed by equally sudden restoration. Some claim that photographs taken in certain areas simply disappear from their devices, as if deleted by an unseen hand. One hunter allegedly found his rifle fused from the inside after an encounter with an unidentified object. The metal components welded together in a way that would require extreme heat, yet the wooden stock remained unburned. Such accounts are impossible to verify and easy to dismiss as exaggeration or fabrication. They are also remarkably consistent across unrelated witnesses who have no obvious reason to lie. The restricted zones within Shimava National Park add another layer of mystery. Certain areas remain closed to visitors, officially for environmental protection, which is entirely reasonable given the park's status as a UNESCO biosphere reserve. The core zones are designed to allow natural processes to proceed without human interference, which means old-growth forest, peat bogs, and fragile ecosystems that could be damaged by tourism. However, the existence of these inaccessible areas inevitably fuels speculation about what else might be happening in the places where no one is allowed to go. The communist government was not above using environmental protection as cover for military or intelligence installations, and old habits of secrecy die hard in regions that spent 40 years under surveillance. Whether the restricted zones conceal anything more interesting than rare mushrooms and nesting birds, nobody outside the park administration can say with certainty. Local attitudes toward these phenomena reflect a particular Central European pragmatism. Farmers and foresters who have worked the Shimava region for generations will readily acknowledge that strange things sometimes happen in the forest, then shrug and continue with their work. This is a population that survived Nazi occupation, communist rule, forced relocations, and the collapse of entire economic systems. Unexplained lights in the sky barely register compared to the very explicable horrors that human beings have inflicted on this region within living memory. The attitude seems to be, yes, something strange might live in the forest, but it has not tried to collectivize agriculture or build a surveillance tower on our mountain, so it is probably less dangerous than our own species. The folklore of Shimava provides context for these modern accounts. Czech mythology includes the Bludička, or will-o'-the-wisp, mysterious lights that flicker over marshes and bogs, luring unwary travelers away from safe paths. These lights are said to be the spirits of unbaptized souls, or, in some versions, deliberately malevolent entities that take pleasure in leading people to their deaths in the swamps. The peat bogs of Shimava, which cover extensive areas at high altitude, would have been perfect terrain for such legends to develop. Travelers navigating the forest at night might easily have followed distant lights, assuming they indicated a settlement or another traveler, only to find themselves hopelessly lost in fog and treacherous ground. Whether modern UFO sightings represent a continuation of this phenomenon under new interpretive frameworks, or whether they describe something genuinely different, is a question that depends largely on your philosophical commitments regarding the new nature of unexplained phenomena. The Shumavsky Hromovlad, or Thunderlord of the Bohemian Forest, adds another dimension to local mythology. This legendary figure, associated with thunder and lightning, supposedly resides in the mountains and controls the storms that sweep across the region. Encountering the Thunderlord is said to be both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a description that matches many contemporary accounts of close encounters with unidentified objects. The continuity between ancient legends and modern sightings suggests either that something genuinely unexplained has inhabited these mountains for millennia, or that human beings have a remarkable tendency to interpret unfamiliar phenomena through whatever cultural framework happens to be available. Both possibilities are interesting. Neither can be definitively proven. What we can say with certainty is that Shumava remains one of Europe's wildest and most mysterious landscapes. The forest that once swallowed entire villages behind the Iron Curtain continues to keep its secrets. The watchtowers that scanned the skies for Western aircraft have been repurposed as tourist viewpoints, but the skies themselves have not become less strange. The restricted zones remain off-limits, their darkness unbroken by flashlights or camera flashes. And the locals, inheritors of 40 years of enforced silence about anything unusual, have not suddenly become talkative about what they see when the sun goes down. Perhaps that is the most telling detail of all. In an age when everyone carries a camera and social media transforms every unusual sighting into viral content within hours, the people who actually live in Shumava remain remarkably reluctant to share their experiences. They will tell you the forest is beautiful, ancient, worth protecting. They will recommend trails and viewpoints and the best places to see rare wildlife. They will discuss the history of the Iron Curtain and the villages that disappeared. But ask about strange lights, about malfunctioning electronics, about what happens in the places where no one is allowed to go, and you are likely to receive a polite smile and a change of subject. Whatever secrets the Bohemian forest holds, those who know them best seem content to let the forest keep them. From the haunted forests of Central Europe, where photographs mysteriously vanish, we travel to a place where divers themselves vanish, and not always mysteriously. Off the coast of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, a few kilometers north of the laid-back resort town of Dahab, sits an underwater sinkhole that has earned the cheerful nickname, the Diver's Cemetery. The Blue Hole is a submarine marvel roughly 60 meters in diameter and over 100 meters deep, with coral-lined walls, crystal-clear water, and an estimated death toll somewhere between 130 and 200 divers in recent decades. The exact number remains unknown because Egypt does not maintain official statistics on diving fatalities, which is perhaps not the most reassuring approach to public safety record-keeping. Local Bedouin fishermen avoided this place for generations, believing it to be cursed by the ghost of a girl who drowned herself to escape an arranged marriage. Modern divers, naturally, heard cursed underwater death trap and thought, perfect vacation destination. The Blue Hole itself is not particularly dangerous. This might seem like a strange thing to say about a place nicknamed after a cemetery, but the reality is more nuanced. The hole is essentially a massive column of deep water, protected from coastal currents by a shallow opening called the Saddle, at approximately 6 meters depth. The water is warm, calm, and visibility often exceeds 30 meters. Recreational divers can explore the upper portions safely, enjoying spectacular coral formations and abundant reef fish in conditions that feel almost spa-like compared to the murky, cold waters many divers train in. The Blue Hole's problem is not what it is what it contains. At 55 meters depth, concealed in the wall of the sinkhole, there is an opening to a 26-meter-long tunnel that leads to the open Red Sea. This feature is called the Arch, and it has killed more divers than any single underwater location on Earth. The Arch creates a perfect psychological trap. Standing at the edge of the Blue Hole on a sunny day, the water is so clear you can see the tunnel entrance glowing with light from the open sea beyond. It looks accessible. It looks achievable. It looks like the kind of challenge an experienced diver could handle on a standard single-tank setup. This perception is lethally incorrect, but the human brain is remarkably skilled at convincing itself that clear water equals safe water, and that visible destinations equal reachable destinations. The diving community has a term for this phenomenon: normalization of deviance, the gradual acceptance of increasingly risky behavior because nothing bad happened the previous times. The Blue Hole exploits this tendency ruthlessly. By the time a diver realizes they are in serious trouble, they are typically too deep, too narked, and too low on air to save themselves. Understanding why the Arch kills requires understanding nitrogen narcosis, which divers colorfully call getting narked, or, in older terminology, the martini effect. Below approximately 30 meters, breathing compressed air causes nitrogen to dissolve into the bloodstream at elevated concentrations, producing symptoms remarkably similar to alcohol intoxication. The rule of thumb was that every 10 meters of depth equaled approximately 1 martini, harmless at shallow depths, potentially fatal at 55 meters. At the entrance to the Arch, a diver on compressed air is effectively 5 martinis deep, which is not an ideal state for making life or death decisions about tunnel navigation. Symptoms include euphoria, impaired judgment, slowed reaction time, and a peculiar sense that everything is fine when everything is very much not fine. Divers have been known to remove their regulators at depth, convinced they no longer needed them. They did, obviously, but nitrogen narcosis does not care about obvious things. The first modern scuba expedition to the Blue Hole occurred in 1968, when a group of Israeli divers led by a man named Alex Shell explored the sinkhole and discovered the arch. This was during the Israeli occupation of the Sinai Peninsula following the Six-Day War of 1967, and the Blue Hole quickly developed an international reputation among the diving community. After Egypt regained the Sinai in 1979, the area opened to broader tourism, and by the 1980s, Dahab had transformed from a Bedouin fishing village into a diving destination. The Blue Hole became a bucket list item for technical divers, those who use specialized equipment and training to exceed recreational diving limits. For properly equipped and competent technical divers, the arch presents a manageable challenge, requiring careful gas management, appropriate breathing mixtures like Trimix, which substitutes helium for some of the nitrogen, and rigorous adherence to decompression protocols. The problem is that many divers who attempt the arch are neither properly equipped nor competent. The most infamous death at the Blue Hole occurred on April 28, 2000, when a 22-year-old Russian-Israeli diving instructor named Yuri Lipsky attempted the arch dive on a single tank of compressed air. Local technical diver Tarek Omar had warned Lipsky twice against attempting the dive, but Lipsky proceeded anyway. What happened next was captured on Lipsky's helmet-mounted camera, which somehow survived the depths and remained functional despite being rated for only 75 meters and ending up at 115. The footage shows Lipsky entering an uncontrolled descent, sinking deeper and deeper as nitrogen narcosis progressively impaired his ability to respond. At approximately 90 meters, he can be seen struggling with his buoyancy compensator, attempting to inflate it and rise, but his movements are sluggish and confused. At 115 meters, nearly 4 times the recreational diving limit, he removes his regulator from his mouth and stops moving. The camera continues recording the sediment slowly settling around his body. Omar recovered Lipsky's body the following day at the request of his mother. When the camera was found to be functional, Omar played the footage, not realizing what it contained. Lipsky's mother was present. The video has since been uploaded to YouTube, where it has accumulated millions of views under titles like "Fatal Diving Accident Caught on Tape." Whether making this footage publicly available serves any purpose beyond morbid curiosity is debatable, though many diving instructors use it as educational material. Omar has expressed regret that the footage survived. "If I had known it existed, I would have flooded it. The camera's survival against all odds feels like a cruel cosmic joke. Technology working perfectly in the one circumstance where its failure would have been merciful." The causes of death at the Blue Hole follow depressingly predictable patterns. Divers underestimate the depth of the arch entrance, miss it entirely, and continue descending past 60, 70, 80 meters as they search for it. The crystal clear water provides no visual depth references, and nitrogen narcosis progressively impairs their ability to recognize the problem. Others find the entrance but underestimate the tunnel's length. It appears much shorter than 26 meters because of the exceptional visibility and the light visible at the far end. Swimming against the current that frequently flows into the Blue Hole, they expend more air than planned and exit the arch with insufficient gas for the mandatory decompression stops required after such deep dives. Decompression sickness, or the bends, occurs when dissolved nitrogen forms bubbles in the bloodstream during ascent. Without proper decompression, these bubbles can cause paralysis, stroke, or death. The nearest recompression chamber is 22 kilometers away on a dirt road. This is not the kind of emergency where response time can be measured in minutes. Memorial plaques line the rocky path leading to the Blue Hole, brass markers bearing the names and dates of divers who did not return. There are at least 14 visible plaques, though they represent only a fraction of the total deaths. Some bodies were never recovered. If families cannot pay for recovery operations, Egyptian law allows the remains to stay where they fell. There are reportedly bodies still at 120 meters depth from incidents that occurred over a decade ago, preserved in the cold darkness at the bottom of the arch. The plaques have become a somber tourist attraction in their own right, photographed by visitors who then walk past the faded sign reading, "Easy Entry, Blue Hole," decorated with cheerful images of fish and a bubble-blowing diver. The cognitive dissonance is remarkable. But perhaps no more remarkable than the fact that the Blue Hole's deadly reputation seems to attract rather than repel divers. The Egyptian Chamber for Diving and Water Sports has implemented stricter regulations in recent years, stationing police at the Blue Hole to ensure divers enter only with certified guides and appropriate qualification. Technical divers must hold at least a Tech 60 certification to attempt the arch, and recreational divers are directed to safer sites like the Bell's entry point, where they can drift along the reef wall and cross the Blue Hole's saddle at a safe 7 meters depth. These measures have reduced fatality rates, though deaths continue to occur among technical divers who overestimate their capabilities or underestimate the Blue Hole's challenges. The site remains popular. Some estimate that thousands of dives occur there annually, and for properly trained divers operating within their limits, it offers genuinely spectacular underwater scenery. The tragedy is that the Blue Hole's beauty and accessibility create an almost irresistible temptation to push beyond those limits, to attempt the arch just once, to prove it can be done. The legendary ghost of the drowned girl, the one the Bedouin fisherman warned about, has never made a confirmed appearance, but one could argue she does not need to. The Blue Hole creates its own siren call, luring divers deeper with the promise of achievement and the illusion of safety. The water is warm, the visibility is perfect. The entrance to the arch is visible from above, glowing with promise. And every year, a handful of divers discover that they have been deceived by their own confidence, their own ambition, their own misplaced certainty that the rules do not apply to them. The Bedouins were right about one thing. Something in the Blue Hole does pull people down. Whether it is a ghost or simply human nature dressed in diving gear is perhaps a matter of perspective. From the depths of the Red Sea, where death arrives quickly and terribly, we travel to a place where death apparently forgot to finish the job. In Prague, in a monastery just steps from the castle that has dominated the Czech capital for a millennium, sits the body of a woman who died in 1663 and apparently did not get the memo about decomposition. Mother Marie Electa of Jesus, born Caterina Tremazzoli in the Italian town of Terni in 1605, founded the Discalced Carmelite convent in Prague and served as its prioress until her death at age 58. 3.5 centuries later, her body remains preserved in a glass case at the Church of St. Benedict on Hradčany Square. Her limbs reportedly still flexible, her skin still intact, her presence still drawing pilgrims who believe she continues to perform miracles from beyond the grave. Medical science has opinions about this. So does the Catholic Church. So do the nuns who have cared for her remains through centuries of upheaval. None of these opinions are in complete agreement, which is perhaps the most honest thing that can be said about the phenomenon of incorruptibility. The life of Marie Electa reads like a 17th century self-help book. Third daughter of impoverished Italian nobility, nudged toward religious life by an uncle who happened to be a Monsignor, discovered a genuine calling that transformed obligation into devotion. She joined the Discalced Carmelites, the barefoot branch of the order reformed by Saint Teresa of Avila, and demonstrated such organizational talent that she was eventually sent to establish new convents across Central Europe. Vienna in 1629, Graz shortly after. Prague in 1656, where Emperor Ferdinand III's wife, Eleonora Gonzaga, sponsored the foundation. Marie Electa proved to be an effective administrator and a deeply contemplative presence, earning the respect of both the imperial court and her fellow nuns. According to later accounts, she also suffered significantly during her final years: cirrhosis of the liver, abdominal dropsy, ascites, and eventually pneumonia that killed her. The anthropologist Emanuel Vulchek later examined her remains and confirmed these conditions from the physical evidence. Whatever else one believes about Marie Electa, she endured considerable suffering before her death. What happened after her death is where the story becomes genuinely strange. Marie Electa was buried in the chapel of St. Elijah at the convent's original location in Mallestrana. Over the following 3 years, nuns visiting her grave reported unusual phenomena: a strange glow emanating from the tomb, a persistent scent of violets in the surrounding area, relief from headaches when praying nearby. One nun claimed to have received a mystical dream instructing her to open the tomb. Whether this dream was genuinely divine or simply the result of excessive fasting and sleep deprivation is not recorded, but the new Mother Superior took it seriously enough to authorize an exhumation. What they found, according to contemporary accounts, defied everything they expected about death. The body was surrounded by a black liquid, the remnants of what should have been complete decomposition. Marie Electa's clothes had rotted away entirely. but her skin remained intact, unmarked by decay. And most remarkably, her joints retained flexibility. The nuns, not unreasonably, concluded that a miracle had occurred. They cleaned the body, dressed it in fresh religious habit, and placed it upright in a glass-sided coffin where it remains visible to this day. Over the centuries, as the convent moved from location to location, expelled to a village during Emperor Joseph II's reforms, relocated to Hradčany Square after Leopold II granted them the former Barnabite monastery, dispersed and interned under communist rule, finally restored after the Velvet Revolution, Marie Electa's body accompanied them, a constant presence through nearly 4 centuries of turbulent Czech history. The Catholic Church has a complicated relationship with incorruptibility. Once considered a potential miracle and evidence of sanctity, the phenomenon is now viewed more cautiously. The Church acknowledges that some saints' bodies do not decay normally, but no longer treats incorruptibility alone as miraculous or as proof of holiness. Too many natural explanations exist. Saponification, the transformation of body fat into a waxy substance, environmental conditions that prevent bacterial growth, intentional or accidental preservation through embalming, and simple definitional flexibility about what incorrupt actually means. Many supposedly incorrupt bodies are now encased in wax, covered with wax masks, or displayed alongside wax effigies that represent their condition at discovery, rather than their current state. Saint Bernadette of Lourdes, perhaps the most famous incorrupt saint, has a wax mask covering her face because the actual skin has darkened and receded over time. This is not deception. The Church is quite open about these practices, but it does complicate the visual spectacle of apparently lifelike saints. Marie Electa's case presents some unusual features. According to accounts that have circulated for centuries, her body has maintained flexibility far beyond what saponification or environmental preservation would typically allow. Nuns who have moved her remains report that her limbs bend naturally, that her joints have not seized into the rigid posture characteristic of most preserved corpses. Medical examinations have reportedly occurred, though detailed records are difficult to obtain, and investigators have expressed surprise at the preservation's extent given the documented diseases that afflicted her before death. Cirrhosis of the liver, in particular, should have accelerated post-mortem decay, not prevented it. The black liquid surrounding her body at exhumation suggests that decomposition did begin and then somehow stopped, which contradicts most natural preservation scenarios that require continuous, favorable conditions from the moment of death. The phenomenon of incorruptibility raises interesting questions about the relationship between faith and evidence. Believers point to approximately 100 recognized incorrupt bodies in Catholic tradition, noting that the preservation often occurs in circumstances that should have promoted decay: burial in wet soil, exposure to quicklime intended to hasten decomposition, or internment without any special preparation. Skeptics counter that the sample is heavily biased. Only bodies that happened to preserve well were exhumed and declared incorrupt, while the thousands of saintly corpses that decayed normally were simply forgotten. No one conducts retrospective studies of decomposed saints to establish a baseline rate of preservation in religious contexts. The incorrupt bodies that exist are, almost by definition, the survivors of a selection process that favors unusual outcomes. What makes the Carmelite monastery in Prague particularly interesting is the broader context of Czech mummy culture, which is a phrase that probably does not appear in many tourism brochures but probably should. The Czech lands have a surprisingly rich tradition of intentional mummification dating back to the Renaissance, when socially prominent individuals were sometimes preserved using abdominal evisceration, herbal stuffing, and immersion in resin and potassium compounds. The practice continued through the 17th century before being banned in the late 18th century. Kings Wenceslaus I, Přemysl Otakar II, John of Luxembourg, and the great Charles IV all received some form of preservation treatment. The Capuchin crypts in Brno contain dozens of preserved bodies. The Sedlec ossuary outside Kutna Hora features the bones of approximately 40,000 people arranged into decorative patterns, including a chandelier made entirely of human skeletal material. The Czechs, it seems, have never been particularly squeamish about displaying their dead. Marie Electa, however, was not intentionally mummified. No records suggest the Carmelite nuns had the knowledge or resources to perform the sophisticated preservation techniques used on royalty, and the discovery of her intact body years after burial came as a genuine surprise. The Church has designated her Servant of God, the first step on the long path toward potential canonization. though no miracles have been formally attributed to her intercession under the rigorous standards modern beatification requires. Pilgrims nonetheless visit her glass coffin at the Church of St. Benedict, where she sits upright in her Carmelite habit, her hands folded, her face serene beneath what may or may not be a wax covering. Sources disagree on this point. Access to the crypt is strictly regulated and typically available only on specific religious occasions, which adds to the mystique surrounding her remains. The question of why some bodies preserve while others decay rapidly remains scientifically unresolved in many specific cases, even as the general mechanisms of preservation are well understood. Temperature, humidity, oxygen levels, bacterial populations, soil chemistry, coffin materials, body composition, and numerous other factors influence decomposition rates. Some combinations of conditions produce remarkable preservation entirely through natural processes. The bog bodies of northern Europe, some of which date back thousands of years, demonstrate what acidic, low-oxygen environments can accomplish. Other bodies decay within weeks, despite burial in seemingly favorable conditions. Marie Electa's preservation might represent an unusual convergence of natural factors, or it might represent something that current scientific models cannot fully explain. The honest answer is that we do not know, and declaring either miracle or coincidence with certainty requires more confidence than the evidence supports. What we can say is that Marie Electa has been dead for over 360 years and shows no signs of going anywhere. Her order continues, having recently relocated from the Hradčany monastery to a converted farm in the village of Drasti outside Prague. Her body remains behind at the Church of St. Benedict, now cared for by the male Discalced Carmelites who took over the monastery. Visitors who make the effort to see her report a strange sense of presence, though whether this represents anything more than the psychological impact of confronting a centuries-old corpse in a glass box is impossible to determine. The nuns who lived with her for decades speak of continued miracles, healings, answered prayers, the sense that Mother Electa intercedes on behalf of those who ask for her help. Science has no method for evaluating such claims. Faith requires no method. And somewhere between these two approaches to truth sits a body that has refused to become what all bodies eventually become, waiting in the dim light of a Prague church for visitors who are willing to look death in the face and find it looking back.